ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Prestige Art Gallery. Maybe I understand you are more comfortable like stand and speak. Yeah. So hi everyone. Firstly, I really want to thank you everyone for coming. Because this is only the second day, first day actually after art history. We have been exhausted. The past few days are also very exciting. And I'm so glad to see some new faces and new friends here tonight. My name is Audrey Zhang. I'm the owner of Prestige Art Gallery. I think I need to maybe turn the echo of the mic. If I make a operation what's on, then the music. So, right. Yeah, I really appreciate for those for handsome gentlemen, also professionals of the arts world with us tonight. I think each of us are very lucky to have this chance to have a very inside conversation with you, Mr. Kwok, Mr. Chong, and Adrian, and Mr. Felix Kwok. So later I'm going to introduce each of them more. I think most of you might know about them already, but I still think it's necessary to give more detailed introduction of each of our guest speakers tonight. But before that, please give me some chance to introduce about our gallery. Our gallery is Prestige Art Gallery. We established in 2019, so we are 5 years old now. Still a very young gallery, but with a strong faith and big vision. The gallery strives to honor and support the unique blend of the diverse history of the art's multiculturalism, fearlessly discovering, showcasing, and spotlighting exceptional modern and contemporary artists from Asia. And the gallery values academic curation and art historical research. We're aiming to explore the impact of art on local culture and cross-cultural dialogue. This approach creates a distinct identity for Prestige Art Gallery, nurturing the ecosystem of the artists, the audience, and the collectors. Our mission is to serve the public as an active participant in the art scene, supporting local and global collectors, and becoming an open platform for mindful conversations on matters impacting each of us lives and finding the answers through art. So today our topic is very interesting, and we have a lot of sign-ups for tonight. I think it's about the past, present, and future of contemporary art in Singapore. I think maybe before we start, could you let me just do a small survey. How many here are from Singapore, from local Singapore? You live here and you maybe work here, study here? More than 5 years, we call it, we are local. More than 5 years, thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, I can see it's about half of us are Singaporean. Okay, that's great. So I think we still have some of them are not so familiar with Singapore art, with Singapore culture, but tonight I think it's really a great chance for you to get a really insight on what is happening and what is the future of the art scene. So now I'm really honored to start to introduce our panelists tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kwok Kian Chow. He's an art historian and curator. Mr. Kwok played a key role in developing Singapore's two main public art museums, which is he was the former director of the National Art Singapore and Singapore Art Museum. Yeah. And the next will be Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong Seng. He was in financial service industry for more than 20 years as a stockbroker and fund manager. He was also an entrepreneur involved in education and media industry as a textbook and magazine publisher. And he has been an active angel investor in Singapore and China. He collects art around the world and is a co-founder of the Cultural Story with his daughter Chong, also tonight with us. And now we have in the Family Office for Arts and the cultural story. And also we have Dr. Adrian Tan. Adrian Tan is a artist curator whose curatorial and academic interests intersect in his research on art in public spaces, performance art, and the contemporary art archive in Southeast Asia. Adrian's academic contributes including teaching at Nanyang Technology University, which is NTU, and Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, and La Salle College. So he's both artist, curator, and also educator. And last but not least, Felix Kwok from Hong Kong. He's specifically come to Singapore for Singapore Art Fair and also for this panel talk from Hong Kong. And Felix was a former head of Sotheby's modern art department in Asia. During his past 30 years working at the Sotheby's Hong Kong, Mr. Kwok has played an instrumental role in promoting the internationalization of Asian modern art, and he's also introduced Western modern art to Asia. So he's very experienced in art market. Later he's going to tell more about his experience from Hong Kong. Okay, I think since we all know who's who now, we can start our conversation for tonight. So in Singapore, contemporary art has evolved alongside the nation's rapid development, reflecting its multicultural heritage, urban growth, and increasing global connections. In discussing contemporary art, one of the critical debates revolve around is the periodization, the act of the categorizing art into distinct historical periods, and its implication for understanding the temporality in art. So I think this is quite academic, but also very crucial concept to give the definition of what is contemporary art. I think Mr. Kwok, you are the best person to introduce about this part. I'd like to, so how would we define the temporality of the contemporary art? And could you also maybe introduce in the context of the Singapore art practice, how does this temporality manifest and intersect with modernity and historical narratives?
Thank you. Yes, first of all, congratulations on your exhibition here, Brass Echoes of Memory. Adrian is curator and you and Rick are the co-curator for this important exhibition. Now, Rust Echoes of Memory, the term rust here, as you can see, is paired with the Chinese title 不朽. And this is very interesting because they don't really mean the same things. Actually, 不朽 means permanence. So this is this one, this little bit of tension in this title actually highlights something that is very significant across languages. And this duality actually encourages an intercultural interpretation of the exhibition. So we are looking at paradoxes here as I read in the curatorial text. It's impermanence alongside endurance, it's loss alongside resilience, and eroding as well as enduring all at the same time. So we come to the topic this evening, which is past, present, and future of contemporary art in Singapore. By this very topic, it suggests a kind of time frame, right? I mean, past, present, future, it suggests a certain time frame. So contemporary art then, as Audrey, as you have put it, it suggests a certain periodization, the historical period, and also category. How is it different then from modern art? Something that we are all concerned with, or maybe it's not that important, I don't know, but I'm going to share my views on that. So first of all, we look at this time period approach, right? Time period approach to understanding contemporary art. So we know the problem with any kind of periodization. First is the
the problem of teleology, which means that we move along a certain pathway towards a certain purpose, and then we are always progressing or not progressing. So there is a notion of development, which can be very problematical because it's not always single directional, or for that matter, understanding things as the progress. Now there is also, of course, the problem of looking at things too homogeneously. That there is just contemporary art, and therefore it is only a part of art practices for as long as you categorize it so, right? I mean, it has to be a limited scope of the totality of art practices by definition, right? And also, the term may not be applicable, right, to various forms of art practices and so on. But I think what is really most important of our concern here, it is this idea of when we look at art in competition, right? And therefore, there is a kind of making a certain set of practices more legitimate than others. In young people's term these days, is this legit or not, right? The idea of legitimacy is framed by a kind of periodization as well as categorization. So, is contemporary art current or is it historical? And it is very interesting if we look at the Singapore Art Museum website. It says that contemporary art is created by artists living and practicing the here and now of art. Therefore, it's supposed to include all artists, all practices, as long as they are clear here and now. However, the museum goes on to say, it is also art of a historical period. So it is both current as well as historical. And how does one, understand this, coupling of history and contemporality? We know that there are two important readers in Singapore art history, edited by Jeffrey Say and Seng Eugene. One is a modern art, one is a contemporary art. Modern art was published in 2023 and the contemporary art in 2016. It is very interesting that the editors have noted that it is actually more challenging to try to look at the time frame for modern art. It depends on how you define it. However, when it comes to contemporary art, the editors are quite happy to say that the emergence of conceptualism in the 1970s, as well as the proliferation of experimental and process-based art practices in the late 80s, will define contemporary art. So normally, as when the historical period is further, we feel that we are more confident to historicize something. But when it is so near, we find it harder. However, it is very interesting that in the art field, it is the reverse. We always feel that we are quite confident to historicize contemporary art, whereas modern art, which is supposed to come before that, it is harder to pin down. So the important Indian art historian has this very important book called When Was Modernism, published in early 1990s. And her emphasis was, there's a need to look at trajectories crisscrossing the whole Western mainstream as well as other parts of the world. So she takes a post-colonial approach to this to say that, far as timeline is concerned, what our interest should be is how the timelines crisscross and interrelate to one another. How much time do I have?
You still have.
I still have, okay, yeah. Thank you. Now, so, Kevin Chua, another art historian, who referenced the title of When Was Modernism, also discussed a lot about Singapore art in relation to how we can understand modernism in the late 19th century, 1920s to 1960s, as well as 70s to 2000s. So these are all the discussions about modern art that we seem to be more open about how to define it. But when it comes to contemporary art, we seem to want to pin it down somewhat. So there is, of course, references in Singapore art history, some important ones. one important early one was 1972. It was an article published in Chinese by Chiu Chai-yang, and who said that, in today's art, the medium itself is no longer important. She also said that it's no longer the manipulation of interrelations of visual spaces within an artwork, but it is more the social relations that we are looking at. And what we should be concerned with is not the individual forms of expression, but the new concepts that influence the directions of art. Now, this article is 52 years old. 52 years old. Sorry, 53 is 2025, isn't it? So it's 53 years old, and I will conclude later on with this article to talk about some inspirations I have from there to try to give contemporary art definition by going through, the kind of various points that I have to look at. Now, the divide between modern and contemporary art in the case of Singapore is actually further reinforced by the two major public art museums. The National Gallery calls itself on the webpage a leading visual arts museum which oversees the world's largest public collection of Singapore and Southeast Asian modern art. The Singapore Museum, on the other hand, says that we will present contemporary art from a Southeast Asian perspective, contemporary art, to underline that, in active dialogue through our collection, research, exhibitions, and programs. So we do have two institutions which actually reinforce the kind of divide of categories that we have with modern and contemporary art. Now, in this exhibition, the artist village, is looked at through artists like Tao Wu and all the 5 artists who are here, and we know that performance art is an important aspect of contemporary art, especially in Singapore. Since Tao Wu came back to Singapore, he promoted performance art, and performance art is very much about embodiment. I mean, the idea of being performative, meaning that you extend the performance elements in order to communicate with the audience and to do a piece of art as something processual, right? I mean, the process of art being more important. Now, performativity, I mean, this is a word that goes around a lot. And the way to understand that is, if you look at linguistics, it's probably easier. So, it's acting out a word. So, instead of verbalize something, we have a word written down or verbalized. It is acting out, and therefore the idea of embodiment, because the body is involved. So it is expressive, it is confirming or challenging, right? Categories that are out there through performances. And it is easy to understand this through feminism, for instance. The idea of gender, right, is performative. It's not natural because, there is a kind of social norm, and therefore everyone performs that. After a while, we all think that it's all natural, but it is actually socialization. Is it actually discipline and normalization? So performance art and performing arts cause a bit of confusion because, when the visual arts world talks about performance art, then, what about performing arts? And people were forever asking, so what's the difference? What is the big deal about MANCE and ING, performing arts? And I think this is where I look at the Chinese usage of this term is very interesting, which is 行为艺术. And 行为艺术 is not exactly performance art. It means that, but it is behavioral art. So I think the word behavior is also easier to understand because, because behavior, meaning empirical studies of, patterns of movements, expressions, extending this to so-called modification of behavior, maybe for health reasons and so on. So the binary there is about social norm and self-discipline. So we always say, oh, please behave yourself, meaning that, behavior suggests a kind of socialization, a kind of social discipline. Therefore, the Chinese artists, when they do 行为艺术, or performance art, it is really to get right to the point of social behavior, to say that our art is a critique of that, or the true behavior is the way we communicate. And this will help us understand Tao's art also, that the idea of performative, it is a way of engaging with the audience, and therefore it is pedagogical, it is communicative. Now, whether the idea of processual art or ephemeral art, whether these are really new, there are some anecdotes from Chinese art history that are really interesting. During the Tang Dynasty, Zhang, the artist, said that my painting on the waterfall will be completed when the waterfall dries up. And the waterfall is very unlikely that it's going to dry up anytime sooner. But the idea of the completeness of a painting is being challenged there. That you don't end a painting. I mean, a painting is already something in a process, And this is related to Chinese aesthetics of trying to so-called 写意, right? To capture the essence of things, and you don't just talk about exactly, when the water is flowing and then stop it right there. And one even more interesting one, at an earlier time, there was an artist, another anecdote, that say, I'm going to pour some ink together with oil into this pool of water. My painting will be completed when the sun dries up the pool of water. And this is certainly ephemeral art, right? Processual art. And this is like more than 1,000 years ago. So my point is, there are reasons for us to think that, contemporary art would emphasize on those few things, and they're importantly so, but, they are also done so for reasons of a kind of competitiveness in terms of legitimizing, different art forms. So back to the question of divide, how much time? Give me a little bit more, I'll finish. We know modernization, right? Modern art focus on subjectivity, right? It is always a rediscovery of the individual. So, it is my creativity, my expression, the inner me. Now, it is interesting that if you think of contemporary art, if we need to, see that as something of, coming a little bit after modernism, it is returning. It is returning to understanding this individualism in a greater collective context. It is understanding that, there is a social context to any expression, and it's not just an individual or even a genius, creating what they will be creating and be endorsed by the art world as the genius. Now, so the way the Singapore Art Museum argues this, I'm quoting the museum again, the current Singapore Museum, is when engaging with contemporary art, viewers are encouraged to consider whether the work is thought-provoking. I think all artworks are thought-provoking, by the way. Beyond asking, is this work aesthetically pleasing? Viewers also reflect on whether the artwork questions the status quo or changes perspectives on an issue. So I think this last point is critical because art has always been like that, let me put it this way. However, because of the kind of networks we have in the past 30, 40 years or so, our knowledge of cultures around the world and through the help of information technologies has become so much more expanded. And therefore, we feel that we are able to handle topics of humanity, topics of cultures over the world, and have a sense of presenting through art where we are now as a kind of connecting point between the individual and the collective, between the individual genius and the larger cultural environment. So I'm going to finish now, right? So I go back to Cho Chai-yang. I think by his writings of 1972, I'm inspired by a few points, although I'm not always agreeing with all the points here, but I'm stimulated by that. I'm inspired by that. So I'm just going to state 4 points, what I think what contemporary art is, which could well be modern art, which could well be generic art. But I think these points are important. Reasons for we being where we are now at this point in time, in the way we could think about culture with a much expanded scope of resources and knowledge and information that we have. Number one, I think medium remains significant because even if you do painting, sculpture, and so on, the kind of aesthetic thinking, the kind of experiences that come from painting and sculpture can inform you about your reflection about culture, about the contemporary world. And it is not that you must do installation art and performance art and so on in order to be contemporary. I think what is more important is for you to be genuine about what you do, to be very truthful about what you do. Now, second point, we are concerned about human activities, and this has always been the case in art, all throughout history. We are always concerned about the human beings and the conditions of being in this world. But we now broaden our scope because of intercultural knowledge that we have. We leverage on the advancement of knowledge technology. Therefore, we better position ourselves, whether as viewers or as artists, to consider the relationship between culture, art, and politics in a more informed and engaged manner. My third point, artworks always embody ideas. You cannot say that there is a piece of artwork that has no idea, right? So you cannot say that it is about ideas or concepts, and therefore it's contemporary art. However, conceptualism is significant because it encompasses a wider range of human and societal concerns through a more considered rendering of forms, materiality, expressions, social context, and the word's communicative potential. It could be a painting, it could be a sculpture, it could be a video, it could be an installation, it could be a performance. As the artist Ming Wang says, I look at what I want to present before I decide on the medium. Now, my final point. So, these are, to me, the fundamentals in contemporary art as well as art of all times. So, timelines and historical sequences help us think through culture and humanity, not as tools for exclusion of some other artworks, of justifying works that we like, for personal reasons, market reasons, institutional reasons, or whatever. But we are recognizing the kind of genuine expression and concern for the larger cultural world by each and every artist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwok. I think it's a very important point Mr. Kwok just raised up. It also sets the fundamental for our discussion tonight, the definition of conceptual art. I think it's also very critical for each of us to rethink what we mean when we talk about contemporary art. And contemporary art for Singapore art region, from our research, may be seen as emerging from the 1970s. And in the case of Singapore, reaching this critical juncture in the 1990s. And through our research, there was a flexible art practice which takes transmedia or transcatalogical orientation. Its flexibility comes from what Mr. Kwok just mentioned. The artists start recognizing that art is constituted by concepts. So Tang Da-Wu, who is one of the leading conceptual artists in Singapore, and his fellow artists who founded the Artist Village in 1988. And they have played a prominent role and significantly impact the later generations. In our gallery now, and we are very honored to have this exhibition, Rust, Echoes of Memories. We are honored to present 5 artists who were the founding member of the Artist Village, including Tang Da-Wu, Li Wen, Vincent Liao, Han Sai-Po, and Kwok Kian Chow. And Mr. Kwok Kian Chow is also with us tonight. Mr. Kwok over there. And all the photos you see, including the light box and all the photos behind of me were made by Kwok Kian Chow. He was started the Artist Village with Tang Da-Wu at the beginning, which was 1980s, and he was there, and he was the founding member. He was also still the current member in Artist Village, and he was also helped to documenting a lot of very important photos to record what was happened during that time. Now I'm going to give the microphone to to Dr. Adrian Tan, because Adrian was the guest curator for our exhibition, Rust Echoes of Memory. He has helped us to write the curatorial content, and we are hoping to using this exhibition to transport audience back to 1980s and 90s, which was the formative period when contemporary art in Singapore was just beginning to take root. So, Dr. Adrian, could you please to share with us more about how the Artist Village and its role in creating spaces for the experimenting?
Okay, thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Kian Chow, for the whole look at chronology, or to not chronology as well. And I think that really brings in my interest in working with the gallery, and also sharing with the audience what we have here in terms of artworks, but also in terms of documentation as well. So a lot of what I think Kian Chow talked about was about the notions of time and breaking away from time frame, time periods, even what we commonly recognize as movements as well. And I think the word fountain came up a few times, and even within my curatorial text, I tend to want to move away from that as well. Because in trying to understand the Artist Village, it really wasn't just about one individual artist. And a lot of times, what we will see from this show is a combination of time. It's a duality of time. The photos bring you back in time, but a lot of these works are artworks from current Artist Village members as well. And it was interesting because just a couple of weeks ago, Prestige Gallery was very kind to allow the current Artist Village members to go about producing an evening of performances in this very space as well. So I think in terms of time, in terms of people, the idea of sociality comes in. The idea of social spaces comes in quite a lot. In what I hope all of you would look at the images and try and dissect the element of time within the documentation, or what you might even consider as photographic artworks as well. So in delving into today's conversation with everyone, I will try and attempt to kind of link to what Kian Chow has mentioned, and maybe pique your interest in looking at the images, sitting down right at the end. So there is, I wouldn't use the word time, but there is a navigation of this show as well. If you notice, it starts from that traditional group photo, that you will have at the orientation, on the first day of school, or even the first time you meet friends as well. So curatorially, we start from the image of members of, or rather artists who have huddled together to make work in a different space and different time as well. So I think looking at the flow, and even from where I sit right now, you recognize that, hey, there is an intentional creation of photographic images that have been curatorially scattered within the space as well. So that's also intentional in kind of getting us to break away from this process of seeing artworks as chronology. What happened first? What was the result of that? What was the influence of that one single artist? And then from there, seeing the various connections. And using the word connections, it really comes out a lot within my research as well, in understanding two big terms that Japanese art historian Reiko Tomi talks about a lot in her research into the Kutai artists, into Japanese artist groups as well, in trying to break away from this colonial notion that all modern shift towards contemporary artworks are under the benefit of the Western world as well. So a lot of what her research talks about is we should always break away from that narrative too, but observe the various connections and resonance that you see in the performances, you visualize in the images as well, and you may also encounter when you visit these performative moments as well. I think that notion of being in that time and space was also what motivated the three of us in kind of conceptualizing the show, in kind of approaching Rust Echoes of Memory as a combination of these three elements of time, past, present, and the future as well. So this dialogue over here is also to kind of open up from the show what we have, or what Kian Chow has spoken about in the here and now, the current, and the roles of the dual institutions, National Gallery of Singapore and Singapore Art Museum as well. I hope to problematize that duality by bringing in art schools as well, that we'll talk about later, perhaps when we talk about Nanyang Academy of Fine Art, and also the Cell School as well, which are important subject matters within today's conversation. But before we go into that, I think what's important is also to recognize the processual and also the pedagogical and the communicative. And that's where documentary photographs come in. In selecting the works, it was important not just to showcase the artist and the act that the artist was making, meaning the act of the performativity, the performative turn as well. But I think for me what was interesting was the notion of the educational turn, or the education turn in contemporary art. In kind of locating each of these images that you see, you notice that there is an element of the space, element of the viewers as well. And that I think is very important when we look at the Singapore Art Archive project, Mr. Kwok Kian Chow's very long-term archival project in the 80s and 90s. He was one of the members of the Artist Village, but he was also working in National Museum Art Gallery as an assistant curator as well. So once again, we see this notion of duality again in his role in the museum, and in his role jumping out of it into the Sembawang art spaces, which was where a lot of these Artist Village performances, this Artist Village documentation took place as well. And I think that also brings in the kind of duality of the city, urbanization, as well as the rural, where it became a safe haven for artists to come together, where art students were accorded time, space, where they shared this space with Tang Da Wu and some other more established artists as well. And I think that is important for my research as an art historian, or even as an artist and curator, like, hey, you know, we understand art history from what we see in the two institutions. We also understand it from reading some of our chronological art historical books that were commissioned, produced, written, and researched by the two institutions too. But I do believe that there should be a vein of maybe more ground up, or perhaps not vernacular, but where you include an ethnographic slant to it, where it's really about the social histories of artists, or maybe understanding how the artists communicated, what they talked about, what happened during the discussions. And if you look through some of Mr. Koh's photos, you will see that, hey, you see artists sitting together in a circle, discussing artworks at National Museum Art Gallery. You also see images of the substation. So we have also highlighted independent art spaces within this show. The substation is just behind us. It was a multidisciplinary art space that existed from the 1990s all the way to just a couple of years ago, where they lost the space, and now it's being opened up as a multi-tenant space as well. So that is also another element of our history in Singapore that is very contested, and space becomes an issue because it's all very sexy when you think of Artist Village. Oh, a group of artists, very bohemian, kind of moving into the kind of rural spaces, being with farm animals, and within a very different setting where you have a kampong space and you have mud, sand, and soil. And yes, there is an element of that kind of duality, or that polarity perhaps. But I think what is more important for me in trying to understand is what happened during those sessions as well. So I'm really hoping that each of you could take a look at the images and perhaps think about how we at this point could be writing a different form of art history that doesn't just, maybe I'm being a little bit sinister here as well, in not accepting what the institutions do inform us, do tell us as well, but since some of the artists are still living, you know, why don't we speak to them, talk to them, and be able to kind of see the connections that they've forged just about 30 to 40 years ago as well. So I think it's also important to kind of look beyond that and maybe echo this to the art market, to the whole ecosystem of art as well, in telling not buyers or collectors, but also in kind of sharing, that within Singapore, we do have a certain form of history that has come about either organically through the use of space, but also how I think there are volumes of readings that have been produced in the last 5 to 10 years. And in moving ahead, how that could also be something that we could develop further, perhaps. And I think just to end off what Kian Chow mentioned about the two publications by St. Eugene and Jeffrey as well, one of the intent of them was to start from the modern, start from the contemporary, and then talk about the modern later as well. So I think that also brings in the different problems, but also the various ideas they have in resituating what has happened in the past and what's happened even further back as well. Yeah, so I hope we can continue the conversation later as you hear from the other two panelists. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian. I think what you just mentioned is something in Singapore we all feel headache, which is space. I think this is a country we always complain lack of space, not just for art, but for many things, right? But when it comes to performance art, it's really have the big requirements about the space. And also as a gallery, we also feel that we jealous about the other countries. Like every time I go back to mainland China or go to overseas, I say, oh, they have such a good space for art museums, for their exhibitions, their gallery space. Yeah, but I think that we have to find a way out, maybe to be more creative with a very limited space, but to make best use of them. And also just mention about the ecosystem with the collectors. Yeah, so this is the next topic we're going to invite Mr. Chong to talk from as a collector's point of view. I also see many collectors visiting us tonight. So I think collectors plays a very crucial part of the art ecosystem. In the latest Art Basel and UBS survey of global collecting for the 2024, which shows that the Singapore had the highest proportion of the new collectors of any region. Are you with me? So with 42% of collecting for less than six years, which means they are very young, very new collectors. They just start collecting. And in Singapore, there's 97% of response express very optimism about the global market. And 52% of surveyed collectors, they plan to purchase more art for the next year. I think it's a very optimistic survey from these numbers. So Ms. Chong, I know that you have more than 40 years experience of art collecting, which is even longer than I lived. So you started to collect art from London, from Paris, when you had a business trip there in 1970s, 80s, right? So from where, but from more recent years, you have shifting your focus from the Europe to more to Asia, and then now it's more focused on Southeast Asia. I think this is a very interesting shift, and I would like to invite you to share more about your collecting story and what makes you now pay more attention to the regional art market. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, for having me, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I think what you have described in terms of my collection journey is really a diary of my life. Because, when I first started collecting European art, it's because I was traveling a lot in my work to London, to Europe, Paris, Switzerland, and you can't but be stimulated by all the culture, and especially the museums and the art galleries there. So I actually ended up in the 80s and especially the 90s buying a lot of Western art, including Russian art. So I have a collection of contemporary Russian art. And then after I left financial services, I spent quite a lot of time in China. So that's when I started collecting Chinese art, especially Chinese contemporary ink. And then after China, I came back to Singapore where I had investments and businesses and all that. And that's where I started looking at Singapore and Southeast Asia art. So in a way, I am probably the least qualified compared to Kian Chow and Adrian, in talking about Singapore and Southeast Asian art. I started very late, to be honest, maybe only around 2010, which I started collecting seriously Singapore and Southeast Asian art. So compared to a lot of my friends who have got, lots of the Nanyang style artists, Zhang Ping, Chen Wenxi, Liu Kang, I've only got one or two compared to their 20. So I'm very late in the game. But I'm optimistic about the opportunities for collecting Singapore art and of course regional art as well. But you mentioned, Audrey, that there was some survey which shows that there's a trend where there are a lot of young collectors who are entering the market now.
Yes.
And I would sort of cynically say, because that correlates to the number of property transactions, where so many new condos are launched, right? I mean, they have walls that need to be filled. And I hope that these walls are filled with, Singapore art. Of course, also in Singapore, we have the two very big and well-organized museums, the National Gallery and the Singapore Art Museum. And then we have now the School of Arts, which actually, University of Arts, is actually a combination of LaSalle and NAFA. So all the stars are aligned, so to speak, in Singapore, for Singapore artists and for Singapore collectors. And I've noticed over the last maybe 5 years, some of our young artists who are the products of NAFA, LaSalle, they have not only been able to sell their works to Singapore and regional collectors, but they are now collected by international collectors, because some of these galleries that represent them are taking them to London, taking them to Paris, introducing their works to important curators of museums and foundations, and what have you. So some of them are really gaining a lot of prominence. And I must mention here also that there are also a number of very young, I mean 30s, 40s collectors who are trained in Singapore, but are now actually working outside of Singapore. You take the likes of multimedia artists like Ming Wong, who's represented by Ota Art. And he's based in Berlin, although he comes back to Singapore quite frequently. And then there is Chow and Lin, a couple who are now based in Beijing. And their works has recently been collected by the biggest museum in New York, MoMA. And they are just, 40 years old, So I can go on and give you a lot of names. So I think in terms of opportunities for you or new collectors or even me, is to keep a lookout for these interesting up-and-coming Singapore collectors, as Singapore artists, whether they're based in Singapore or they're based overseas. And hopefully you can buy a nice piece which you will firstly need to enjoy looking and hanging in your house. And hopefully in 10, 20 years' time, when you retire and you need to monetize or encash your collection, you know, it will make you a lot of money.
Yeah, so I know as I just mentioned, Mr. Chong had a cultural story, which is have been collaborated with a lot of both local and international collectors. So you have a very close insight of those collectors. I really wish to know how have this interest and the preference of those collectors have been evolved in the recent years. Have you ever had any observations from those collectors?
Well, I would say that in my opportunities where I'm able to connect with some of these collectors from overseas, not just when they come to Singapore, but also when we meet them in Hong Kong for Art Basel, or we meet them, like last year we were in India for Art India, you know, and so on. We see a lot now of international museum curators who are making the trip out to Asia, you know, and these are people who are on the lookout for Asian works of art, which they want to add to their portfolio, you know, because a lot of the international museums outside of Asia, especially those in, say, America or Europe or even, you know, the UK, they have very little of Asian art. And they are desperate because Asia is now so important, right? And most of them is, I mean, as some of you would have observed, right, the new Trump administration, you know, the guy that they have put before the Senate for confirmation hearings was asked, can you name one Asian country? He couldn't name any. So you just say, oh, there's Japan, there's Australia, there's, you know, he couldn't name one Asian country. So this is the kind of ignorance. But I would say that, okay, the art people, meaning the directors of museums, the curators, I think they know Asia, but they like to know more, and especially to identify opportunities where the museums can do shows, whether in New York or in London, of these outstanding Asian artists, or they can acquire the works, you know. So for example, last year when I was in Tate Modern in London, is one of the biggest museums, right? I was so shocked that in their biggest hall, the Turbine Hall, they had, and this is normally reserved for the most senior and accomplished artists, they had a young Korean lady, I forgot her name, she's like 32 years old, and she had this huge installation, you know? And I was like, my God, I mean, you know, this is saying something, right, for Asian art, for female artists, and of course for her, you know, at this age. Normally, you must be close to 80 years old before you're given that honor to have your solo exhibition, you know? So I think things are moving in the right direction, and hopefully all this would be translated, you know, into greater interest of Asian artists internationally. So if you are based in Singapore, you shouldn't miss the boat, right? Because the last thing you want is an artwork that is right under your nose, or an artist that is right under your nose in Singapore or in Malaysia or Indonesia or whatever, is bought by somebody sitting in, I don't know, Zurich or, you know, Scotland or New York, you know, and you say, I wish I have bought it because I've seen this artist, I've been to her show, why didn't I buy it?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think the history always repeats, and same thing has happened before and will happen again. And I think you just mentioned about the Korean artists. Yeah, I also heard a lot of people mention that Korean, I think Korean government or Korean art foundations, they do have invest a lot to build up this national brand, I would say, through art and culture. And this is like a soft power to influence, have the big impact on the not just Asia, but outside of Asia, the Western world. I think maybe Korean can be one of the role model of Singapore, but another very important role model, I think, is Hong Kong. Yeah, so I think now I want to invite Felix to share more about his perspective and his experience. If you have ever seen an auction in Sotheby, you might feel Felix looks very familiar because he's the one who has a record of the highest price for Picasso and Zhang in Asia. He broke the record several times. And Hong Kong has long been regarded as Asia's art capital, while Singapore art markets remain more emergent. And based on your experience in Hong Kong, Felix, how would you compare the collector-based market infrastructures and the trend in the Singapore art scene? And what is the unique aspect of Singapore art do you think could make it more distinctive and appeal to the international collectors? So could you give us some of your opinions, please?
Thank you, Audrey, and hi, gentlemen. And hi, everybody. Good evening and Happy New Year. So my name is Felix Kwok. I am the former head of modern art of Sotheby's Asia, and I'm still a practicing Chinese auctioneer right now. So it's a great pleasure to be here in Singapore, and I have been officially comparing between Singapore and Hong Kong as an art hub in Asia, and also being part of the contributor of Singapore in recent years as we reintroduced Sotheby's auction to Singapore since 2022. And I think among all these international auction houses, Sotheby's, my former company, is still the most committed international secondary market maker in Singapore. So out of this 2 years experience in the middle of COVID till now, I am really surprised by the rapid growth of Singapore as an art hub, not only in Southeast Asia, but in the entire Asia. And I'm personally expecting it will soar even higher in 5 years' time. So when I talk about the growth of Singapore, first of all, we would like to talk about transaction volume. But more than that, I think it's the growth of the ecosystem. So I remember in 2022, when I first came to Singapore for Sotheby's first reopened edition of Singapore auction, I tried my very best to meet a lot of people. And I think this is the first time that you meet me in Singapore as a Sotheby's man. I remember my impression is everybody outside Singapore has a high expectation, strong interest to be involved in the art community here in this amazing country. It is safe, it is prosperous, we see everybody here, it's very intense, the infrastructure is so good, it's a very transparent place. But we found that the platform for overseas friends with a strong interest in Singapore, it's quite limited. But after 2 years, just 2 years, when I just come back, I see everybody building their platform here. So we got galleries, we got established galleries, we got new galleries, we have auction houses. Finally, thank God, Sotheby's doing his auction during the Singapore Art Week, which we have been pushing the company to make this decision for several seasons. Finally, they take our advice and, revise the calendar from off-season to on-season during the Singapore Art Week. And I believe that it is really working very well a few days ago. And, we have private museums. I like the Keppel Road buildings. There are private museums there. And then we have more and more communities, platforms, collectors groups, societies to talk about art. So I believe that this is very similar to Hong Kong probably 20 years ago, after SARS, which was really the time where modern contemporary art took off in Hong Kong. And then in the past 10 years, with the help of Art Basel, Hong Kong really became the most significant international art hub, which could be, on par of London, New York, and Paris. So going back to Singapore, I believe a few days ago, the Sotheby's auction really speaks for the energy of Singapore, because in the auction result, we can see that Singapore is a real promised land for the secondary market of Southeast Asian art. So Christine Aiju broke the record, and then Raden Saleh work sold really well. At the same time, it is also echoing the Hong Kong market in terms of the Chinese masters. So Chu Teh-Chun sold very well, and we can see that there is getting a stronger and stronger preference of the Southeast Asian market in terms of their how receptive they are to the Chinese modern artwork. So it's getting more and more cosmopolitan. So when we talk about Singapore, of course, it's the hub for the promotion of Singaporean artists. In the broader sense, it is apparently the art and culture center of the entire Southeast Asian region. And with a longer reach, I mean, we could reasonably forecast that it has a stronger tie to Greater China and, well, think about South Asian as well. So this is like Singapore is stretching its long arms, to our neighbors, and then, even a much bigger size of cultural identities in East Asia and South Asia. So I think this is what we could reasonably expect, that Singapore could build itself as one of very strong pole in terms of the cultural diversity in the 21st century. And from now on, I mean, if you believe Chinese feng shui, we are turning to the new 九运. So we are all feeling that, there's new opportunities coming, there are new trends, and we could feel that the world is changing a lot in terms of the cultural landscape. So let's look forward. I'm really hopeful. I'm really passionate. Audrey knows it. I come to Singapore very frequently, and I'm glad to see that Audrey and all my Singaporean friends are visiting Singapore more frequently. We have a lot of confidence here. And I believe that with the rise of Singapore in this foreseeable future, that the interaction within Asia would be more or less similar to what we can see in Europe. Because in Europe, we not only have London, we not only have Paris, but at the same time, we got a lot of cultural hubs. Amsterdam, Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, Rome, Dusseldorf. It forms a very sophisticated web across the continent of Europe. So in Asia, we should be glad to see our neighbor growing. So we are not only having Hong Kong, we should also have Singapore. We not only should have Singapore, but at the same time, we should also help each other to grow. Jakarta, Shanghai, Beijing, Taipei, every single city shares the common internationality of Asia, but at the same time, we get a very strong flavor of the local authentic culture. So when we look at Art SG, I would say on the basement floor, we would be having, typical international art fair, blue chip galleries like Gagosian, But I think everybody would be more interested on level one, where we are featuring our, Southeast Asian and Singaporean artists, because this is where we really could discover the authentic feature of the region, and we are happy to see, interesting, exciting, provocative faces of Southeast Asia and Singapore. So I believe that the galleries should be doing quite well this time, because I see very strong traffic. I see a lot of collectors' faces, and I could even see that because in Taipei, on the 17th of January, they just have a very big opening of Tsinghua University, which is the biggest Chinese Collectors Society opening for their 30th anniversary. So I thought that it would be drawing a lot of attention of the people away from Singapore. But what really surprised me is that right after the opening, everybody flew back to Singapore for the event. So it really speaks for the charm of Singapore. People would be happy to fly, back to back. Today Taipei, tomorrow Singapore, and then it would be making Singapore a real international hub in the modern contemporary art world. So I want to congratulate everyone and congratulate Audrey. I really see her and her team growing quickly and breeding a very strong crowd of our collectors in Singapore. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Felix. I think what you have shared is really encouraging. And I think it's also very realistic because we just observed in ArtSG in the past 4 days. Our gallery was the first time attend ArtSG, and we had a booth on the level 1. And we were really, really surprised to see the traffic, the visitors. We host almost 1,000 of people a day in our booth. Yeah, it's no kidding. Because we have 8 staff and 8 hours non-stop talking. Everyone come to ask about the artist, about the price, yeah, which makes us feel, it's like a dream comes true. Yeah, we never feel lonely again in Singapore as a gallerist. You feel the trend is there. And I always share with people, for Singapore art market, it's not about yes or no. It's not a question about yes or no, but it's a question about how. Because I believe that I know once the mindset has been accelerate, once it's like a flame. Once it's really have this fireworks. Yeah, I don't know how to explain, but I just feel that art is about the faith. It's like a kind of like religion, like what you believe in. And since you all sit here with me and the panelists, they have sharing things really in faith, and I know they know what they talk about and they truly believe in that. I think the things is not far away, and we will see it. Not just the art market, but the whole ecosystem will grow. It's not grow up yet, but as we all gathering together, and I think there's a bigger and bigger chance, and we can make people see how good there's a really equality, good standard of artists in Singapore. And tomorrow there's going to be another talk from Felix. He has prepared it for for many days, and we talk
many sleepless nights.
Yeah, exactly. I really appreciate that. Tomorrow the topic will be focused on performance art. So it will be from the artist village to the
banana and the duct tape.
Yes. It's something people are curious, and it's very hot topic. But actually, it's something related to the fundamental of the contemporary art, about the conceptual art, about performance art, and this we'll find a lot of like what Adrian just shared also, and Mr. Kwok. Even in 1,000 years ago in Asian China, people started doing experimental, conceptual art. It's a kind of gene, within us. We are, as a human being, we have this creativity, we have these dreams to do something interesting and also inspiring. So Felix tomorrow will share a lot about from an international perspective. Yes, we're going to have. We were planning at 8, but yes, sure, yeah, please.
I have questions for everybody.
Okay.
I'm going to address it to you.
Okay, yes, please.
I'll just keep on that you guys are welcome to chime in. I'll keep it to 2 questions. So the first one is for Felix. Thank you so much. And it's very encouraging to hear that people are flying in, Audrey from Taiwan. I said this only once in Chong was there, which is it kind of feels like the F1 season for art last week. Lots of parties. Just lots of interesting, influential people from the region. I mean, it's great. I think it's a happy problem that the traffic is so bad. But I was just curious from your point of view, what do we do after our week in terms of really promoting and encouraging people to appreciate the art with a sense of conversation, with a sense of genuinely buying something because you appreciate the artist and the practice, and not just buying something that has investment value. I mean, everyone has to start from somewhere, I understand that. And you're not curator, so I'm curious from your point of view, and also now that you've moved out of Sotheby's, how do we engage you more? What is the value add? How do we be part of that web? How do we grow that web? Because this part of the region is very fragmented. This is different cultures, different languages, different states of modernization, with first world status to 1.5 status to whatever. So it's very complex. We're not quite reached the levels of Europe. I don't have a very well-developed question, but in essence, I just wanted to ask what would you like to see more, and what can we do as people, stakeholders from Singapore, to make this sustainable, right? Because the last thing we want is when the party, when the music stops, that's it. So that's my question to you, and I have one for the academics, which let's hear from you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And I think your question is exactly why I left Sotheby's. Because after working in Sotheby's for 13 years, I am kind of having enough. I think having the same pattern of work, cycle after cycle, is like karma, right? I reincarnate every 6 months. I think I've done whatever I could in my former role. And I believe that the entire Asian art ecosystem has entered the other stage, because in the past 15 years, probably after the financial tsunami till the end of COVID, around 15 years, in Asia, we experienced together the fastest, most significant growth of the art market, very much led by auction, followed by art fair, and then, backed by galleries. And then we have a rapid growth and establishment of private museums, which are really what we call the end collectors, because they buy in, they never sell, usually speaking. So what I'm feeling is, by the end of COVID, I'm feeling we already have the major components of our art market ecosystems. So in every city, we could see, take Singapore as an example, in 2 years' time, we could see the components of a complete art ecosystem is there. And then we can see that this kind of growth is everywhere in Asia. Taipei, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, even Guangzhou, and then Jakarta, everywhere. They are having the same rapid growth. But what we could do next step, and without someone to take the initiative, is how we could foster the exchange in a more day-to-day and a more sophisticated way. So that's why I have the idea of, why don't I try to take this courageous step, and I try to be the one to pull all this together. Because during my time as the head of Modern, I'm actually doing a lot of things that the company didn't ask me to do. That is, try to do more teaching in universities, initiate research projects. I filmed my own mini documentary, which you can search in YouTube. All these things are additional effort that I try to foster a stronger and more complete ecosystem with more content. We need ideas. We need money to drive the ecosystem moving. But at the same time, if we want to get more fun, more liquidity into the ecosystem, we need ideas, we need creativity, and which is not just the job of the artist. Because market maker, we're all industry players. We all need ideas, new ideas of talk, more research contents, more avant-garde idea, more creativity in terms of the promotion of the artist, more creative marketing. These are all creativities. So I'm not the artist, but I take myself as the art market maker, and I should be more creative as well. So I'm feeling that I'm bored of Sotheby's operation. I mean, we're still at a very good place. I'm very close to my ex-colleagues, but I just don't want to do something that I could even close my eyes and finish an auction, because that's too repetitive. And that's why I am now, leaving the auction house, and I'm trying to do more creative projects. So what I'm trying to say is, I mean, I'm feeling that the private museums, galleries, they are, you know, eagerly looking for more contents, more creative ideas, including today. I really appreciate Audrey's effort of fostering such a platform of, you know, beautiful guests, brilliant minds, and we all come together and think about the future of Singapore. And then, you know, today we're doing a Singaporean performance art show, you know, very conceptual. And tomorrow we're going to talk about from an international context. How should we value our Singaporean artists on an international platform? So there's an Olympic Games of all performance artists. So where should we position them? So this is actually the purpose of tomorrow, tomorrow's talk. Yes. And you know, if I could spare like 30 seconds, I would be talking about, you know, why there's a performance art coming during the beginning of modernism. Well, it's basically coming from dynamism in the modern context, and then in the post-war era, 1950s, 1960s, we have the first wave of performance artists, which is also partially associated to the abstract expressionism. And then they work more separately later on in 1970s, 1980s, and then approaching the millennium, we can see performance art is everywhere. So we could compare our Singaporean artists versus international masters. And then I will also talk about, you know, some Sotheby's projects that I have been personally involved, from Shuzhen Supermarket to the shredded Banksy, to Wong Kar-wai, which is really my baby project, and then also the banana and duct tape. And then after reviewing all these, when we look back to our Singapore performance artists, then we would see that, wow, on an international level, we are still, you know, shining. And they are apparently artistically, commercially speaking, undervalued. Then we will see, you know, we should really cast our vote of confidence to our artists, and this is something that we should be really proud of, that our very brave, courageous avant-garde artists really left the legacy of Singaporean art, and this is very authentic and original.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. The next question is for Kian Chow and Adrian, which is, because the topic is contemporary art in Singapore, right? Past, present, and future. And I was curious about, so I posed this question to a friend, because I went to the Bangkok Biennale recently, and Adrian is the curator, right? And I just kind of threw a question to her and I said, oh, so who's Adrian's protege? Like, who's the next up-and-coming young curator, right? Who is bilingual, well-connected, travels, has been groomed in that sense, and also to take over some of that, not only institutional knowledge, but the network, the international network that he has. And then I kind of cast that question back to Singapore, whereby, is there that sort of mentoring where, how should I, because now, I mean, today, Beijing Times is a talk, right? And a lot of people, are with the institutions in-house, but for those who are working outside of that unit, who's up and coming, and things from artist rich days, Fifth Passage, how is that knowledge, context, nuances being passed down, besides reading books, besides reading memos, besides looking at photographs? And then the other question that I had, just to get your thoughts, is how do you describe our contemporary artists today? I mean, they're very diverse. Some deal with materiality, some deal with very conceptual ideas, but our modern artists and Nanyang artists were very nicely labeled as Nanyang artists. But subsequently, I for a non-Singaporean, I think it can be quite hard to understand this generation of artists. I mean, maybe it's just my opinion, but how do we describe them? And I read a book last year which was about the YBAs, because the young British artists. And that book just perfectly captures the zeitgeist for them, that 20 years of Davidness and Tracy and all this stuff. It might be a marketing thing, but I was just thinking, how would that be helpful to promote Singaporean artists? Locally and internationally? Maybe not, I just want to say what's.
I just answer by 2 points, which I'm personally very much involved in researching and curating and thinking about. One is, of course, what happens after documenta. As you know, Indonesian art became huge because Rang Rupa was the artistic director for the documenta in 2022. And what that amounted to is, there's a lot of thinking aloud around as documenta link up with, in fact, larger parts of the world to say that, culture and the arts, the way you create art and so on, is through the collectives as opposed to individual artists. And whether it was documenta recognizing that or Indonesians promoting that, it has brought about probably the biggest challenge to contemporary art in the last few decades. That is, as long as you look at contemporary art as a kind of extension, a further development of Western ideas, Western art ideas, even including the avant-garde, how about the rest of the world, which actually produce art really very differently? To begin with, not the names of individual artists being important. So that is a very fundamental question, and we do not know how that will evolve in about our thinking about arts and culture. Whatever it is, it has generated the kind of reflection about contemporary art that probably no other programs has done it, and hence the interest in Indonesia and by extension Southeast Asia. And there is this Guangzhou program, for instance. They look at collectives in Southeast Asia and didn't quite look at Singapore because they are interested in the kind of art making in Vietnam, Philippines, even Malaysia, and not so much Singapore. So that's one point. All right. I hope it probably brings out more, thinking than to just answer your question. But that's one point. The next point is about Singapore art history. I think we have an issue with Singapore art history that we actually began the art history in about 1960s because of the idea of Nanyang style, which is based on an exhibition in Kuala Lumpur in 1979 called Retrospective of Nanyang style, which brought about a kind of definition for Nanyang style, and then the artists were then known as the category Nanyang style. Now the problem with that discourse is that it started from somewhere in the 60s and it's based on an exhibition in the late 70s. So we have the art historian Yoman Tong in Singapore, who looks at things very differently. He looks at the background of 1930s, 40s, 50s Singapore, and to turn the whole question of Nanyang style around to say that instead of looking at style, in other words, characteristics, stylistic characteristics of art, we should think further about what is the foundation of aesthetics, of the cultural context of Singapore and Malaya, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. So he calls this Nanyang Feng as opposed to Nanyang style because he questions, the point of using the word style even. Now, I think that's a very interesting provocation, for thinking about the need to look in depth into the kind of historical sources of Singapore history, the need to go further back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, to start from suddenly 60s, 60s, and 70s. And all this kind of work is just starting, really. So it's like an ongoing reflection and thinking, rethinking, and questioning and re-questioning about our history, our art history. And this will help inform the way we would think about contemporary practices and the arts of the 70s, 80s, and so on.
Can I just leave what Ken spoke about? I think it's also important to hark back to the third localism as well. And a lot of times when we try to subject a series of, once again, artistic styles that came about based on early research of the 50s, 60s, we do not kind of recognize or bring in other ideas as well. So I think one thing if you look at history, there's always this notion of, once again, decontextualizing history, or the idea of rewriting history, with, for example, 600 years of Singapore, for example, where when we are young, we were brought up to understand, 1890 was the founding of Singapore. But beyond that, there is more to it. There's 600 years of civilization, and us art historians dug up relics, dug up objects, interview people, research into various historical documents, into the archives as well. So I think that's something that really needs to be looked into. Our art history is relatively short. We have 60s, and that also links back to our cultural movements and our cultural policies as well. Going back to 1970 policies, museum roundtables as well. We have kind of cultural white papers as well that were all created post 1965. The idea of nation building, the idea of once again moving away from the British rule, and a lot of these were really started from the 50s as well. In which the British were already preparing for their departure from Singapore. So I think what I'm trying to kind of link to is we cannot merely isolate and talk about Nanyang style and simply relate to that one exhibition, that one art historian has written about it. But I think there is room for geographers, there's a room for sociologists, there's a room for maybe non-art historians, and maybe bringing in different languages too, the understanding of vernacular culture. Looking at Chinese newspapers, Malay newspapers, Tamil newspapers, all these could in a way allow us to triangulate, I'm using kind of research terms here, but triangulate the information and move away from what we have always been introducing in our art history books, all the way down to our primary school art syllabus, up to our secondary school and our junior college, and even SOTA as well. And these are what our students are taught, so I think there is a need to kind of relook education as well. And I think Sir Chong mentioned about NAFA and LaSalle graduates doing very well. And a lot of these new artists do have that one single monolithic understanding of our art history. So I think there is a need to create more opportunities for such discussions and maybe engage the institutions more as well. And even earlier on, we were talking about, hey, we have curators who look at the new University of the Arts and wonder, hey, there is a certain cannibalism going on here, in which you have the courses coming in, they are stretching or pulling students apart in kind of having too many courses that replicate one another. But I think that is also the larger picture, where you really need to look at how national narrative can be constructed from different institutions too. Nanyang Academy of Fine Art, LaSalle, they both have their rich history. They both come from different starting points as well. A lot of artists here came from LaSalle. A lot of artists here still teach in NAFA, for example. So I think there is a need to once again support the ecosystem, but that's where maybe research really comes in. At the end of the day, art collectors do their research, and if they are only introduced to what you find online, there are few articles, the two museums. I think there needs to be more debate over it. And I think you brought in Bangkok Biennale as well. It's also important to once again bring in the state in such a conversation. What is the state's role in kind of supporting the artists, in kind of supporting such big blockbuster events? But what about the groundwork that were done? What happened to the early programs, like your artist residencies, your art spaces in Teluk Kurau, your art spaces for artists as well. So I think there's a need to not just look at the art market, but also look at artists need space, therefore they need studios. So what happened to all the early kind of art housing schemes, etc.? Yeah, so I'm doing one big look, but I guess I'm not sure whether I answered the question, but I guess it's important to kind of bring in all these various factors.
May I just add to this?
Yes, please.
I think these are very serious and important questions about the development of the arts in Singapore, and of course, the history of where we've come from and where we're going into the future. I was just reminded that yesterday there was a conference. It's an annual conference by the Institute of Policy Studies. Big event, where all the serious thinkers and our government ministers would attend. I used to attend, but it's becoming so expensive that I refuse to pay, I don't know, $500 or $800 for a full day event. But the point is, there was a very good sociologist and probably political scientist called Sharon George, who was a Singaporean, was a professor here, but is now teaching in Hong Kong. Great thinker, great writer. He's written books, including one called, I think, PAP versus PAP. So in this particular conference yesterday, he actually highlighted the fact that the government, although it's done a fantastic job in terms of making sure that everybody is united, regardless of race, religion, and so on, is still the dominant force in terms of controlling what we should be seeing or reading or seeing, participating in conferences and shows, and may I add especially art exhibitions. So he actually highlighted the fact that now there's certain events where the government have a sticker, for mature audiences only. And these are events about ecology, about what you have to be conscious of, and so on. So, in a sense, I think a lot of us, the masses, our understanding of and appreciation of art unconsciously has been, so to speak, groomed by what the government consider is good, like good art, right? If it's a bit controversial, they will say something like children below 16 or whatever, not allowed because there is some nudity, or they will probably say politically for mature adults only. So I think this is something that we have to probably see some maturity, hopefully, from the government, so that the artists can really create what is, I would say, original, and what is hopefully world-class, because the world is not going to accept a work of art which is sanctioned, so to speak, right? Because the American collector or institution or whatever is saying, hey, look, you know, this is made in Singapore, yes, but it's not art. it's approved by the government, you know. So I think that's what I feel need to change, and hopefully with that kind of loosening, we get a chance to see even better art.
Just to add that, in the last Venice Biennale, in the central pavilion, the main exhibition, there was a Singapore artist, and the name is Shanghai. And when the work comes back to Singapore, it is actually shown in the Singapore Art Week, but it has been given an R21 rating, which the gallery is unable to show, because how can an art gallery go and check everybody's IC, whether you are 21 years old or not? And this is like one of the absolutely biggest names in Singapore art out there, and she just won the Deutsche Bank Artist of the Year award. And you know, we don't really know about such a great artist.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah.
So do you see there's a chance we'll be loosen this kind of censorship in Singapore context? When and how it's going to be loosed? Who's going to lose it? I think as a new Singaporean, I do feel conscious about this, and I don't know what we can do. And as Ning just raised up, actually this is our second part of question, but thank you for asking for me. I'm going to ask about the challenges, about questioning about the educational things, right? As we because Adrian also teach for the institution, NTU, NAFA. I'm also very curious because there's a growing tendency of the conceptual arts, and they use the interdisciplinarity, and it's I think that the tendency is getting more and more complicated from my point of view as a collector, as a gallerist. Sometimes I don't know how to convince the collector to understand this kind of art. And I also curious about what is the institution's point of view and the academic curricula in sorry, I'm not questioning anything. I'm just curious, what is the what is your aim of educating the younger generation, and where will this bring them to? And maybe you can share a bit about this.
Wow. I think one of the main observations I've had is with the various creations of new tertiary programs, like the double major in NTU, the English language and art history modules, or the courses, as well as new courses like museum studies, curator courses in NTU School of Arts and Media in the past 5-7 years, where we brought in big curators like Uta Bauer, and also bringing in various platforms for students to be immersed in the ecosystem as well, in the evolving ecosystem in Singapore, with RSG, with the various implementations in the last 7 to 10 years. There is just from observation, there is a closeness perhaps to how artists, students see the art world as well. I guess before that, there's always a distinction from the artist, art world seems a bit far. But I think with such policies and with such programs in place, when you have a curator who is there teaching in class as a student, even as an PhD kind of researcher as well, it was something that allowed me to learn directly from quite a number of not just important figures, but good thinkers in the industry and the field as well. So I think that's something that's kind of changed in the last few years. And you also get curators in Singapore that move to the academia as well, who are teaching universities, teaching art schools as well. So they bring in their past 10, 20 years of real life experiences. And the last thing would be with social media and with students gaining access to a lot of shows, exhibitions, as well as materials online. They are also able to synthesize various aspects of their learning to come up with responses to what they see as well. So even a show like this would get a lot of students thinking, oh, I know a bit about this, but I didn't know some other aspects of it. So I think it's also important to kind of bring that into the ecosystem where, especially with the professionalization, with the new University of the Arts Singapore, it's also important to create more maybe master's programs, more PhD programs that are outside of what we always know of NTU and NUS. Once again, the idea of plurality again. So I think hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, the ecosystem, the whole infrastructure, the whole landscape will really change, where you get diverse views. And I think that to me is interesting, as a young academic as well, as someone who has just recently completed a PhD barely 3 years ago. I think I'm also kind of working towards understanding more from the current ecosystem, speaking to students, art collectors, speaking to people from the field as well. And there is a lot for us to unpack, especially hearing that within the next 5 to 10 years, Singapore will prosper and go beyond that and become a larger hub than what it already is as well. Yeah, so I think that to me is useful. Yeah, that closeness and that reduction of the distance.
Yeah, I think we will give the chance to more audience.
Sorry, I have a question for both Mr. Chong and Felix and anyone else who might have a theory. There's a mystery that I've been trying to solve and understand. On the one hand, everyone talks about how there's a greater buzz in Singapore and how the Singapore Art Week is amazing. And as somebody who's been watching the scene, there's no doubt that in the past 3 years there's been a profusion of explosion, especially of the collector scene, right? Mr. Chong and his daughter has a show. Pierre Loridan has this amazing show. The Institute, Richard Cole. So from that point of view, it looks like the scene is bursting. But then when you look at the art fair, our flagship art fair, which is Art Stage, it's just getting smaller and smaller. No matter what they might say about in terms of sales figures and so on and so forth, those of us who saw what the fair was 3 years ago, we saw that there were many, many more blue chip galleries, right? There were more than 12 or something. And this year they only had Gagosian, White Cube, Lehman Morgan, and I think about three or four mega galleries. So the galleries are coming. And also even among the good emerging galleries, a lot of them came for the first 2 years and they didn't come back. And the numbers speak for themselves, because the first year of the art fair they had 165 galleries, the second year they had 115, and this year they had 105. So it's the converse kind of like, so I'm trying to understand, do you have a theory for why the art fair isn't doing so well? Because we all know that the people behind it are excellent. Magnus has an entire history of creating Art Hong Kong, which went on to become Art Basel Hong Kong, and it's just buzzing. So what do you have a theory for why that is so?
Okay, I'll try to explain based on my own limited knowledge and experience. Hong Kong has an hinterland called China. Singapore doesn't have an hinterland. We are surrounded by Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines. And these collectors are very loyal to their own artists and very loyal to their own art fairs. So if you are an Indonesian collector, you will go to Art Jakarta, and you will buy Indonesian artists. Similarly in the Philippines, Art Philippines. And so Singapore, we've got Singapore collectors, but we don't have enough firepower And the collectors who buy, or at least the big collectors who buy, they don't wait for Arts SG to shop. They go to London, they go to Paris, they go to New York. So a lot of their buying, especially we're talking about big collectors who don't worry about spending $1 million or so, they don't wait for RSG to come to Singapore. They go out to make their acquisitions. So what you're left with is actually the smaller buyers, where the limit, the outer limit, is probably 50 to 100,000. So which means that only the younger galleries are able to sell. And actually, I find that C Focus, which is a smaller fair, is doing a lot better. It's growing by every year, So I was just wondering that it's about time, because it's got very limited space. So actually, C Focus should look at doubling their capacity next year or in the future years, because a lot of very interesting artists from the region are coming to show in C Focus. And C Focus for the galleries, the rental is so much cheaper. Whereas art industry, you're talking about 50,000 to rent a booth. And this is before, if you're a foreign gallerist, your shipment, your staff coming in and all that. So easily close to 100,000. So you have to sell at $200,000 worth of artworks before you can break even. So if your artists are selling for 20,000, you can sell 10, But if your artists are selling for $1 million, then fine, that's not a problem. So I don't know how we can solve this problem. I'll leave it to the experts. But this is the reality of the market. So how are we going to encourage more galleries to come, and especially how to stimulate demand? Because you can bring all the top galleries, but if they cannot sell, then they won't come back. So the problem with the declining number of galleries is because a lot of them found that they couldn't make money or can't even break even. So I have a lot of gallery friends from Hong Kong, for example. They came, to see the show. They visited my show, but they never wanted to take up space because the first year they came, first year art industry was really good. The experience was no good, So this time around, they said, oh, no, I'm not going to spend 50, 100,000 taking out a booth. I will just spend 5,000, fly from Hong Kong, meet collectors, check around the booth and see, what's going on. So I think that's the the situation at the moment.
Can I say something as an outsider who went to the 3 editions? I think less is more, because those galleries that remain are the ones surviving. You must be selling, right? If you are not selling, you're not making money, then no point having a booth. So, and also as I see this time around, I actually see the art. I don't see so many dazzle and too many things all at once trying to get my attention. So I actually spend time looking at the art, talking to the galleries, talking to the artists. I think it's much better actually. And local collectors notice local artists, which is very obvious. So I think it's a good thing, right? Having more, and then what does all the other galleries bring? They are just bringing all the Western artists. And there's nothing wrong with Western artists. We are actually the global majority now. So we should support Asian art.
I think you make a good question, because we all need to be optimistic because we're all in the community, but at the same time we should take our rose glasses off, because not every day is about sunshine and rainbow. So we can observe again from the past 3 editions of RSG. So the first one, beginner's game, and also because Singapore in 2022 is the most open city in the Asian article. Hong Kong is terribly close that time, so there's a beginner's game. And then I think in the second and third edition, we are facing the truth, or we are facing that RSG is going to become a normal scenario. So we're going to face the reality and the real challenges when Hong Kong, Shanghai, Taipei is coming back. So I think it's nothing wrong. I would say the second and third edition, it's more or less the same in terms of participation galleries. Just a few galleries coming in or leaving doesn't really affect our overall perception of the fair. I think it's more about, except the help of mainland China, which is less significant recently to the art market. I would say the recent downturn is making the impact less strong. I would say it's about, if we are talking about Western art in Asia, from a Western, very American, European perspective, if they want to put something in Asia to sell, Hong Kong would be the first option because it's a real diverse and open market. There's no tax, custom paperwork, very easy. In the best window, say in March in Hong Kong, you see everybody all over the world. So without doubt, Western consigners, Western galleries would take Hong Kong as the first window in a normal situation. And this is also why during my role as a head of modern, I formally introduced Western Impressionist and modern to Hong Kong, and then I distributed them to the rest of Asia, which was successful. That's why I think I have the experience on the front line to talk about it. Instead, I think why I'm still highly optimistic about Singapore, because again, it's about diversity. Singapore doesn't need to repeat Hong Kong has been doing, because Hong Kong has its flavor, has its advantages, great, but Singapore also has unrivaled advantages as well. Because in Hong Kong, I have no chance to reach out to Vietnamese, Filipino, Indonesian, Malaysian collectors. We have the top tier, maybe, but we can't cultivate into the deep market, and we can't spend that much time to breed the new collectors. And this is what exactly Singapore can do, and let alone, we got no clues about South Asian collectors, which is getting incredibly rich in the recent years. So Hong Kong would be, of course, we have the support of mainland China. We got some Thai connections with Taiwan still. And then we could reach out to Singapore, and then almost that's it. But when we look into the rapidly growing wealth, interest of the entire Southeast Asian region, there's so much to do here. My friend, I am here, I'm spending my time, effort, everything in Singapore. There's a reason, because not only because I have the true appreciation of the art of Singapore and Southeast Asia, but also I think there's untapped potential, which means that we need to do our own job. We can't just count on, Western fairs. We need to do our own job. So I think we have made great effort to create an international window. I think there would be at least 2. The first one would be Singapore Art Week. The second one probably would be the F1 time. That would really draw international attention on and traffic on Singapore. And that's probably when we have fully cultivated the Singapore Art Week to Art Month, and then we got a fully packed January schedule for the world, for the international friends. Then probably the next step would how we convert the F1 season from a car racing season to something with, the art features as well, because the foot traffic is pretty impressive. And that's why, it means that we've got much things to do. We need to take, it's going to take us 5 to 10 years to catch up maybe Hong Kong, and then we would be in competition with Taiwan and Shanghai, and then we need to cultivate our own crowd. We will create our advantages. Well, at that time, you know, Hong Kong should be frightened, and they should think about what to do. I mean, this is the healthy competition. And, you know, the fair is important, but I would always say art fair is the window. But if you want to really enter a house, you don't just stand on the window, outside the window, and then look into it. You want to enter it. That's why many of my gallery friends, they are already planning not only to join the art fair in Singapore, because they really want to do something inside it. So they want to enter Singapore, if it is the home, they want to enter the home, not just looking at the home outside of the window. That's why I think there's so much to do. That's why I would be more than happy to spend more time here with my dear friends here.
Thank you. I think for the time reason is the last questions from the audience. Who would like to ask any of the panelists to choose this chance, or maybe share your feedback? That's I really appreciate your feedback also. Anyone want to have last questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah. My question is to Mr. Kwok. Just how you mentioned, you are art historian, director, and curator. And just how you mentioned history, you mentioned the book some 52 or 53 years ago. You mentioned the history of contemporary art in Singapore. My question is, have you ever seen something new in the art circle for contemporary art? Have you observed or noticed new movements or new trends of Singapore artists in the field of contemporary art?
I think we tend to look at, you know, the idea of category is no longer the way to look at art these days. You know, the idea of a school or a movement and so on, because, you know, there's always great diversity. So what I tried to do, and, you know, my fellow panelists did it better than me, is to pin down some fundamental points as to, you know, how art is being created here. Not to the extent of calling it a school or movement, but the fundamentals. And I think the fundamentals are absolutely there, you know, whether in terms of our experiences, our constraints too, and, you know, in creating artworks that are unique. It is absolutely there, just as we see words from Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and so on. You know, they're all unique in their own ways. But I don't think we use terms like movements or styles anymore, really.
Can I just, I would agree that it's hard to call an art movement is something out of Singapore. I'd just like to mention what my brother Nate has highlighted, and that's the experience of the UK, I think in the 80s or the 90s, where you have this young British artists, from Tracy Emin to Damien Hirst to, you know, there are so many others, right? Easily 20 or more. And all of them have got their different styles, right? But they were all of a certain age, and they had a very good supporter, Mr. Sachi, who's a great marketer. You know, he's the guy that was I would say, I may be wrong, but I think he was the guy that helped Margaret Thatcher to win the elections, because he was advertising maverick. So he took it upon himself to buy the works of these young British artists and promoted them. You know? So, silly things like a dead sheep, you know, put in plastic, was sold for millions, you know, and then butterflies were pinned on boards and also sold for millions, right? So I think at the end of the day, I hope that Singapore will produce its own young Singapore artists, YSA, not YPA, but YSA, of artists who are now in their 30s, right? Including one artist here, Desmond, who is based in Singapore and Perth, you know, and then some collector or some, I think institution will be hard, but a major collector and benefactor will collect these artists and then promote them, you know, and say that, look, these are the YSA artists that I'm going to promote, they are going to be big, so please buy, support them, you know, and make sure that these artists get the proper shows, the proper exposure. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but I think it can be done. And I've seen it happening with one or two galleries in Singapore who have been very successful with young artists. I think, Hilby, you know, Paturi, you know. All the artists are fresh, almost fresh out of the art school. Most of them are below 30. And he promotes them and they are selling so well. And he's brought them to London, he's brought them to Paris, and they are now being collected by major collectors, international collectors, and also institutions. So I think that's the way to go. Not so much looking at any movement. It doesn't happen because every one of them have their own practice. But if we can brand them under Singapore artists, young Singapore artists, you know, maybe have a cut-off age, you know, 40 and below, or 45 and below, and maybe NAC can put $1 million budget, you know, to its promotion and advertising and, you know, whatever. I think we've got something going.
Thank you. I think it's a really good strategy, and maybe that's the next step we're looking for to brand up the real Singapore young artists to the world. Okay, so that is the end of our panel discussion. And, thank you. And let's give a applause to our